What's up, traders, and welcome back to another YouTube video. So, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin and what I see happening next. Before I get into that, there are a few videos that I did put up earlier in the year regarding buys that we were looking at on Bitcoin. And, we didn't get sustained movements to the upside, but I do believe this was the area that we were looking at the time. And we can see that we did get quite a significant push to the upside from that area. However, price did not hold and it then came back and pushed to the downside. The good thing, however, of using these higher time frames to do your analysis before going down and looking for trades is that you can get quite a good opportunity, quite a few opportunities in your direction, even if you're wrong about the overall direction that price is going to move in. But let's not cry too much over spilled milk and let's get into today's video. Before I do so, remember, I'm not licensed nor qualified to offer financial investment or trading advice, right? Everything I speak about on these videos is purely my own opinion. Do not recommend trading live capital. But if you do it with capital that you are willing to risk, as you could lose your entire investment. Now, let's get into the video and let's talk a little bit about market structure really quickly. Now, I did do a video on market structure and I'll try to link it sort of to the video so that you to this video so that you guys, if you have not seen that, you can go back and have a look at that very basic look at market structure. But there's some specific things that I like to look for before I sort of um, before I expect a change in trend or before I call something a change in trend, right? So looking at this, we can see that we're in a bullish market. We made a higher high, higher low, made a higher high, made a higher low, then we made a lower high, and we made a lower low at this point. So what happened here is we had this break of structure. Now, I consider this a higher high, but I do not consider this a break of market structure here, right? Why? Because though we have wicks that made this a higher high, we do not have a candle body close about this area for me to consider that a break of market structure, right? So for that specific reason, we can then see that price did pull back, it failed to hold, formed a lower high, and then pushed to the downside. So price is now starting to show evidence of a bearish trend. However, we've only got one lower high that has now formed a lower low, right? What we would not need to see is that if price does pull back, we would want to see this lower high in here, push on and break structure again to the downside. And once that does happen, then I would consider this a shift in momentum. So this first push created a shift in market structure. But if I get another break of structure, then I would consider that a switch in momentum. And then on the pullbacks, however deep they may come, they normally would come deeper before price does continue to the downside. But however deep the retracements come, I would be looking for sustained moves to the downside thereafter, right? So that is not really necessary for today's video, but it's just a by the way in there. So right now what we're looking at is this is what I would call a recommitment, as there is something that happened in this area, which is something I'm not necessarily going to talk about. As I mentioned in the previous video, there are certain things I'm just not going to speak about, and that's just because it is part of the mentorship content. Now, I'm not trying to plug my mentorship or anything like that. I'm just simply saying that there's certain things I'm not going to talk about, right? Now, looking at that, we'd consider that the weekly high in here, right? Because that's the high that broke structure. We have to remain aware of the fact that the overall swing high is in this area here. So if price breaks this high here, doesn't necessarily mean now it's going to go long-term bullish again. All it means is that we should just look for a higher opportunity and look to go back to the downside again. If you are familiar with the concept of liquidity graphs and so forth, then perhaps then you would understand a bit more about what's meant to happen above here before price does proceed to the downside. Now we have that as the weekly high. At this point here, we have a weekly low because this is the low that was formed and then price did move away. And now we can see that it's forming a high before it proceeds lower. So what are we expecting? We've got a bearish leg that broke structure at this point as well. And now we should expect price to make its way to the downside. So when I was looking at this, I actually wanted to do this video 3 days ago. I did have a zone that I was looking at in here. And unfortunately, because I did the other videos, I didn't necessarily have enough time for me to do this video as well. And, there were some awesome opportunities that then came out of this area in here, simply based on price reversal zones, right, on the Fibonacci. price came into the 23.6 to 38.2. There's a specific pattern that I trade in here, and now I would expect price to then reach down. I've got this area here. This is simply just a negative 23 on the fib. So this is my first trend pivot, and that is the next area that I would expect price to reach down into. I'm just going to put a yellow line on there, and I'm going to try to maintain this analysis for all the updates that I'm going to do going forward, so you guys can just simply see the progression of how price is playing out thereafter. So now my next extension to the downside would be into that negative 23.6 area in there. So bearish because of this break in structure, lower high, lower low, break in market structure, high momentum move to the ups, to the downside, pull back, very slow, choppy pullback to the upside, which is something that you really want to see. And right now, after price then hit that zone, what can we see? If you trade candlesticks and so forth, you can see that we have what? An engulfing candlestick in that area. So now, what I would suggest, I don't trade engulfing candlesticks and so forth, but when I used to look at this, what I would normally do is, so an engulfing candlestick is simply a break of structure on the lower time frame, right? So what I would do is, I can just extend this out. So what I would do is wait for a pullback into around 50% of that candlestick, and then that is where I would look to sell again, right? So to get into those confirmation sells. So I'm just going to put a red line on that. Perhaps that would be of some significance when we drop down to the lower time frame. If we can see any good reason around that area for selling, then why not? Why not use it as a confluence for us to look for those sells? But overall, that would be essentially an area that we could expect price to come back into before we expect a continuous move to the downside. So now we've got that information, we can drop down to the H4 chart and we can look a little bit more. So after price left that zone, we know from this zone onwards, I was bearish. So once price left that zone, what can we see, right? Very important when you drop down to the lower time frame to still track your structure, right? So what do we see here? We can see price traded, made a low, made a high, made a higher low, made a higher high, and then broke structure to the downside, right? If you want to, you could always call this a high. You could call this a higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, and then you would have a break of market structure at this point and then price pushed to the downside. Now, what can we see about what's happened in this area? Now, we can see that this area in here is a very significant area, right? Because price interacted quite a bit with this area. Look at it. If you draw that and you pull it out, you can see that price reacted very significantly from here. We have this player, we have this player, we have this breakthrough, we have a retest. Price played around, and then dropped back to the downside. So this is a key area in the marketplace where if we see price coming back into that area, we can see a push to the downside. This is that 50% of the weekly engulfing candle, this red line in here. Remember, we drew it on the weekly time frame. So we want to see price come into around this area. From this area, anywhere above here, as long as price does not break above this high, we should be looking for sells to the downside. Now, what can we also see? If you trade chart patterns and so forth, you can see that we've got a shoulder, we've got a head, we've got a break of the neckline, and when price comes back in here, we would have a right shoulder in that area, wherever it is, right? It doesn't have to come exactly to that zone. We have a right shoulder, and then we could expect that to move to the downside. So even though I don't trade these chart patterns and candlestick patterns and so forth, I don't ever, even when I speak to my students, I don't ever tell them that these things don't work. Under the right context, with the right confluences, definitely these things do work, right? So I'm not one of those guys that are going to say, hey, don't trade this doesn't work, that doesn't work, trend lines don't work, blah, 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 because ultimately there are people out there that are making money out of it. So if it didn't work, doesn't that mean that nobody would be able to make money out of it? So the fact that people are able to make money out of it means that it works. Now, all you want to try to do is try to increase your precision with them so that you can understand under which circumstances they work, right? So looking at that, what we could do is we have that swing structure in there, we have this minor structure in here. So as far as I'm concerned, this is my break of market structure here. Okay, so that would be my break of structure in there. I hope it's around me again. I feel like it's probably going to do that. It absolutely did. All right, so that's my break in market structure in there. This is now becomes my H4 high here. Okay, so that's my H4 high, and we've now got an H4 low that was created in that area in there. So with that being said, that would be the next area that I would sort of expect to see price reacting from. So this is the range. In essence, this is your validation range, or the range that I would use to validate. So should price then break above, remember that we have this high. So this would be the ultimate high, right? That we would expect price not to break. I did mention that on the higher time frame. So as long as price maintains this, that means it could come and push slightly above here, play around here if it wants to, whatever it wants to do before it pushes to the downside, as long as it does not break this overall area in here, right? So that would be essentially my trade idea, my next expectation. So I want to see price, even if price gives us another push to the downside, perhaps we get a pullback, a break again, and then price will begin to make its way back to the upside. Once it gets above here, it's in sell territory as far as I'm concerned. So from around this area in here, if it touches this key area here, even better. To be very honest, if it touches this key area in here, I would be super hyper focused on taking sells, right? Given all of the other confirmations that I've spoken about as to why I would be looking for those sells. Another thing we could do is grab a flip from here down into here, right? And look for the deepest area you can see in here, entry one, entry two marked on my fib. That's simply just the 62 to 79% fib areas, right? That's all that is, right? So that would be the zone that I would expect to get into entries ultimately. As soon as price touches the zone, this is where I want to see those entry opportunities, right? That means that when I drop down, because this is the 4 hour time frame. So what am I saying? Even if you have a break, whatever price does, right? When it comes back into this area in here, this is when I'm going to drop down to the lower time frame. And this is where I can begin to start looking for what? Those double tops. I can begin to start looking for those head and shoulders again to take sales to the downside. I can begin to start looking for that shift in structure. So price coming from here up into here would give us a bullish trend. So we'd probably get another bullish trend. And if I can get a shift in structure, then I can do the same thing again. Fib from this to down here. And then I can look at the 79%. And then when price retraces into there, I can look for sells back to the downside. So these are the things that I would look to see happening in here on a lower time frame, like a 30-minute or a 15-minute chart, once price does make its way up into there. But however, so that would be the sell opportunities, right? With price, where price is right now, based on how it's reacting, I would expect to see another minor break to the downside. So perhaps on the lower time frame, we have something in here. We actually do we? Yeah, we actually do have a break of structure right here on the lower time frame. So price has retraced. So this is also still a good opportunity to look for some sells with stop losses. That's where I would look to put stop losses. And then I'm basically looking to target back to the downside again, maybe a 1 to 4, 1 to 5, whatever it is. The next significant area would be around this area in here where we'd see price reaching down into. So in fact, this would be the area, right? So that is essentially my thought process, my ideas on Bitcoin going forward. So we are bearish. We are looking for opportunities to the downside. We are expecting to see it reach lower, but that does not necessarily mean that all hope is lost, right? Because the best thing about being a speculative trader is that you get to make money when the market's moving up. You get to make money when the market's moving down. You just have to identify and position yourself in that trend. Has been a pleasure, as always, to share with you guys, and I am wishing you a blessed and profitable remainder to the trading week. And I will catch up with you guys on the next video.